My name is Mark Tanous, and I'm a ceramic artist here on the Monterey Peninsula. I work primarily in high-fire stoneware. I have a show in the area about every 6 months, drawing from the images and atmosphere that we have on this artistic community of ours. The show that I've got coming up here at the MOM is called Deep in the Blues, Treasures from the Monterey Bay and Beyond. And it's basically a nautical archaeology show. I've created a cast of characters, and they have a collection that they are turning over to the museum. So all of the pieces have stories. The primary couple that has done the collection has been collecting for over 55 years. So it's a pretty wide spectrum of styles of ceramics, color schemes, and shapes and such. This is a created world. One of the fun things about this show is that I have created a cast of characters. My shows are like a concept album. For instance, like the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's or the Who's Tommy. I really, create a cast of characters and storylines that are this all-encompassing world. So there's full stories, background. I write histories for all of my characters, and what happens is then those stories become overlaid in the pieces. For instance, the last show I had at the Carl Cherry Center in Carmel was called The Reductionists, The Lost Years. There's a movement, a Mark Tanous created movement, called The Reductionists. Well, if you read the manifesto that I wrote, if you read their history, you'll go, well, this makes perfect sense. It's a what-if kind of concept. What if this group of potters in the mid-20s in Los Angeles sort of pioneered this way of working, and then they spread out. They went to universities, they joined co-ops, and they spread this philosophy, this style of firing. And I took myself where I am now, and I drew a line all the way back, and I created a cast of characters that brought me up to date. So my shows they're concept shows. I originally started in ceramics as a very, very young child up in Davis at the TB9 building with Robert Arneson. My dad was up there as a graduate student. He was Wayne Thiebaud's TA. And so I started in basically the vortex of California funk ceramics. And so I had incredible experience watching these guys do ceramics, lost wax casting. My dad's studio was out in the middle of a cherry orchard. It was quite an experience. So that's where I made my first clay. I then continued on doing clay my entire life. I ended up in the film business in Los Angeles and joined a small studio there and created pieces. Then when I moved back to the Monterey Peninsula about 16, 17 years ago, I started working here and drawing on the influences of this peninsula, especially water. I'm very, very attracted to water. The show that I had 3 years ago was called Water Currency for the New Millennium. So I created a whole series of pieces around water, where we've abused water, where we've properly used water. And this show, Deep in the Blues, I'm actually revisiting one of the concepts that I introduced in the original water show. I generally wheel throw, so I use a potter's wheel, fire to cone 10, which is about 2,350 degrees. And most of my pieces, after I make what I call blanks, which I throw on the wheel. I take them off the wheel and then work with them. Paddle them, I'll add pieces to them, I'll roll them around on the ground, I'll let them dry, I'll pound them. So I will try to put back into them some sort of imperfect hand-wrought feel. So there is a sense of history in them, you know, that pieces were used. They were used and they've been found. I really enjoy that style of working. This show, Deep in the Blues, is a collection that there's a couple. Gia Fortuna and Jasper Anthony have been collecting ceramics for over 55 years. They have sourced these pieces from up and down the coast. They lived on the Monterey Peninsula here. And there are pieces in this collection, for instance, Henry Miller, before he moved to Big Sur, lived during the Depression in Paris. Well, one of his friends in Paris was a fellow named Ferris Taub. Ferris Taub came to the United States with Henry Miller and started a bar in an homage to Henry Miller. Well, that bar was called Tropic of Decanter. So we've got some pieces from that. There was a guy that worked for the city of Pacific Grove when they deconstructed the dump off of Lover's Point, the Chinese dump. And he collected pieces when they were, you know, pulling that stuff out of the water. He took that stuff home, and there are some of those pieces in this. There's a fellow that runs a salvage company up in Moss Landing. We've got some pieces from him. I've got some water vessels that tie back to when the Chinese came over to work on the railroads. So it ties back to my original water show, where there was a village that you needed to get permission from the head man in the village to live there so you could have water rights. So what they've got is these jars that are that have the stamp from that village that they brought over with water for particular ceremonies, like if a child was born. So there's all of these stories around all of these little mini collections inside their big collection. And I call the mini collections flights. So there could be anywhere from, really there could be one, but up to 4 or 5 pieces that are part of their own little family that are all inside this Deep in the Blues show. The thing that makes all of the stories fun and feel real is that I draw upon the realities of our peninsula, the histories of our peninsula. Henry Miller did live in Big Sur. There was a Chinese dump off of Lover's Point. There is salvage companies up in Moss Landing. There are people all over this peninsula that have collected artifacts all along the way, all different kinds with all different kinds of stories. You know, we're all getting those things in garage sales. So what I've done is taken a version, I've made my own version of this artistic history, and I'm telling it through these people's eyes. Jasper and Gia, she kept a journal. So every time they, you know, stumbled upon something in some little curio shop at Callista's down on Cannery Row, they asked Callista, you know, where did this come from? Oh, this guy, you know, this old sea dog, he came in here from Cabo, and that's where we found this piece. And so it's all wrapped around to create this reimagined world in and around, you know, contemporary ceramics. You know, the Monterey Peninsula brings to us such a richness of color and texture. So what I've done is drawn upon the different colors of the bay, the formations of the rock, the barnacles growing on the pier timbers. All of those are recreated in my pieces. You don't look at it and go, oh, that's a timber from the wharf, but you go, that's dry, that's crunchy, that looks, you know. I have a glaze that I've created called My Mediterranean. It's a very, very deep, rich, looks like a blue coral. When you see that, you'll think, This thing looks like it's been at the bottom of the Monterey Bay for 500 years. So I've drawn on basically the textures and colors of our coastline. That's what really appeals to me. I go down to the wharf and I watch the change of the color. I'm looking down at the pylons, because those, where the barnacles grow, all of that is what, brings richness to my palette.